Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, August 15th. Welcome to the Inside Edge. So today is the big day in determining whether acting U.S. Attorney Alina Habba has the authority to continue prosecuting cases in the District of New Jersey. Two New Jersey defendants are challenging Habba's ability to prosecute them because of the very particular machinations that the Trump administration used to put her in her role. And that case will be heard today before a Pennsylvania judge named Matthew Brann. And I'm not a lawyer, so take everything that I say here with that grain of salt. But I am a journalist who's been covering this issue kind of since the beginning, and I've read a lot of these filings. And one thing that I've sort of noticed about the tenor of these filings is to what extent the judiciary should be taking into account what I'll call the spirit of the law. The Trump administration has laid out sort of a piecemeal approach for exactly which laws it is relying on to get to each stage of how Habba is in her role. If you interpret this law this way, then she has this many days as interim U.S. attorney. If you interpret this law this way, then the president has the power to do this and the attorney general has the power to do that. I'm not going to spell out every single step here, but you get the idea. They are relying on reasonable, if contested, interpretations of federal law to get them from point A to point B to point C, and point C is Alina Habba gets to be acting U.S. attorney. And the two New Jersey defendants and their lawyers who are challenging this, take issue with those individual interpretations of law, but also underlying their arguments is a more general disagreement with how the Trump administration is approaching the spirit of the law. Because these laws are designed such that presidents don't really get unilateral power over U.S. attorney appointments. They've got these catches embedded in them where either the Senate comes in with its advise and consent role and approves or potentially rejects the nominee, or the federal judiciary steps in after an interim U.S. attorney's term has expired and either chooses to retain that person or appoint someone new. And the federal judiciary in New Jersey did exactly that in this case and were essentially overruled by Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi. So that's, even if basically the argument goes, you can theoretically get from point A to point B cobbling together these various different statutes, the spirit of the law is kind of undeniably upended by the way that the Trump administration has gone about this. Is the argument that's being put forward by the two defendants, Julian Giroud and Cesar Pina, although their individual identities are not necessarily all that important to these discussions. And then just yesterday, a pair of interesting amicus briefs were filed by a group of current and former members of Congress, some of whom were around in 2007 when a lot of the relevant law that's currently in place regarding these appointments was enacted, basically saying it is important that Congress and the judiciary retain some level of power in this in order to both obey these individual federal statutes and the Constitution's broader protections of separation of powers. And so regardless of the other merits of this case, the general necessity to retain that separation of powers is critical. That's sort of the argument they're putting before the judge. I have no idea how Judge Brann will approach any of this. I don't know whether he is going to stick to the very sort of literal interpretation of federal statute that the Trump administration is more promoting. I don't know whether to what extent he's going to consider these more spirit of the law type arguments, the arguments that are being put forward by these members of Congress, one of whom is Frank Pallone from New Jersey. And also one thing that none of us really know is to what extent the individual nature of the two cases that are actually before him will matter. These are two defendants. One is before the court on drug and weapons charges. The other is a real estate investor who was charged by Habba just last month with, I believe it was bribery. So these are individual cases that sort of, those lawyers happen to be the ones to put this challenge before the court. We don't know whether the specifics of those cases will matter at all in terms of how Brann makes his decision. We're kind of talking about this in these lofty terms of how U.S. attorneys function and how federal statute functions, but it's possible that the ultimate ruling in this case could be more narrowly tailored because of the specifics of the individual people involved here. I mean, we all kind of thought that the 2024 case over the county line was going to inevitably apply to both Democrats and Republicans, but because no one actually made the argument for Republicans, the judge in that case only applied it to Democrats. So federal judges do like to get specific and tricky sometimes with these things, and we just don't know. But that's all going to be put before the court today, and I'm certainly very excited or interested to see how it goes, and I think a lot of other people are too. So I hope everyone has a great weekend. That's all I've got. Have a good one.